Daniel, thank you for your time. So, did business get the best deal out of that address by the President tonight?
Well, good evening. I do think there's a much greater sense of maturity in how to deal with these waves that come upon us. It does look as though government has learned its lessons from the capricious and arbitrary application of regulation from the earlier lockdowns. But of course, I suppose the issue is, we don't quite know how bad this third wave is going to be. We also, of course, really need more clarity on the actual vaccination program, which has been lackluster and tardy. And it's unfortunate, for that matter, that we've gone into this third wave, a wave that perhaps could have been partially avoided, at least, if that vaccination program had been a little bit more efficient.
So what needs to happen then on that score as far as piling pressure on government to A, be more transparent, and B, just get on with it and at a faster pace?
It is an issue of get on with it, and it is an issue, unfortunately, that we did miss precious months towards the end of last year and earlier this year when we should have been more prepared to order vaccines in advance. But having said that, we have to deal with the position right now, and the position right now is that government does have to be pressured. All aspects of South African society need ultimately to hold government to account on the efficient rollout, not just the practical side of the rollout at venues, but also the workings of the electronic schemes that allow South Africans to register efficiently. There's great frustration and anger out there and concern from many South Africans, particularly older South Africans. And I felt somehow tonight that this wasn't adequately addressed, or there wasn't sufficient empathy coming from the President on this particular issue.
And just on that, Daniel, let me ask you then, because in the President's address there was a lot of focus on the quote-unquote non-surgical interventions, the wearing of masks, avoiding gatherings, the washing of hands and sanitizing. Do you think that there's actually an uneven application of pressure, you feel, from government to citizens as far as a duty to get the country and see it through the worst of this pandemic, to a degree where, in fact, government itself is not taking enough responsibility for what it needs to do, for example, the issue with the vaccination drive?
Well, look, the reality is that we don't have enough vaccinations out for the public at the moment, so it is up to individual South Africans to fall back onto what they know. Now, the existing laws are in place. Laws regarding face mask wearing are well in place. We all understand social distancing, yet South Africans, and I agree with the President there, have become tardy, they've become fatigued. He's absolutely corrected that. But equally so, government has also been tardy at rolling out this vaccine program. I think there needs to be an equivalency, really, in terms of the urgency. Government need to criticize itself, and government certainly need to warn South Africans just to be careful over this next few months until hopefully that vaccination program is ratcheted up successfully.
Let's go back to the question of the economy then, because no business, overall business in South Africa and very much globally, businesses are not operating at levels where they were pre-March 2020. How do we recharge the domestic economy given this very unique set of circumstances?
Well, South Africa's domestic economy was ailing before COVID, and many of those structural issues at fault before COVID seem to remain now, during, and potentially after COVID as well. We need a complete and thorough review of how government looks and embraces and works with the private sector in South Africa. The recovery just cannot be a state-led recovery. It has to be a recovery in conjunction with the expertise available in the private sector. And I'm afraid to say, if we let the state just take the lead on this, then we may well not see a recovery. We may well go back, and we may well see the state further squander the assets and the taxpayers' money, as we've just seen over the last few months in scandal after scandal.
Last week, we were having a conversation when S&P and Fitch, the ratings agencies, kept our long-term sovereign credit rating at BB-, which is, 3 notches below investment grade. Do you think with the current interventions we're doing enough to move out of that grade?
Well, I'm not convinced we're doing enough to move out of the grade. I think we've perhaps arrested the fall in our in the reductions of our investment grade. So I think we're going to remain at these levels until there is real proof, substantive proof of those structural changes that need to be made. Now, those structural changes are creating great consternation and argument within government right now. There are different factions. The factions in the ANC are not just about issues relating to corruption and criminal charges. They're also around economic policy going forward. And I think that's where the real action has to be. It has to be from the leadership, the current leadership in the ANC, to take the proverbial bull by the horns and look at a new economic dispensation for South Africa that moves us away from the populist style of rhetoric and policy that we've had from the ANC over the last 10 years or so.
Speak about recovery then, because there was some optimism, some hope that we'd be able to have seen the worst economic effects by the end of 2021, 2022. Do you think that's too ambitious a target?
Now, I do think that we've seen the worst. I do expect, therefore, that on GDP growth rates over the course of this year and next year should begin to recover, hopefully, if we get through a more limited third wave, if we manage to at least messily have a vaccine rollout, we will see growth rates on the bounce effect come back to perhaps just under 3% or around 3% by the end of the year. But ultimately, the bounce effect is going to create something of a distorted growth rate for South Africa. The projections for the next 3 years are barely at about 2% or so on average for the next 3 years. We need to grow at 3, 4, 5% if we are to absorb all of those new work seekers and unemployed youth in South Africa, and only a real radical rethink, not a populist rethink of economic policy, but a radical rethink that really embraces the private sector with the state in cooperation, in a patriotic cooperation. I think that can get us back to better growth rates going forward.
Daniel, good to speak to you. Daniel Silke is a political analyst and economist at Political Futures Consultancy.